Ladies and gentlemen, that's the cue for all of those who are just outside the door to step in. And there are plenty of seats in the front. We are here for one of those UN-titled kind of meetings. Decarbonization and detoxification opportunities for integrated action. In other words, we are really good in the UN at coming up with names that really don't mean anything. So basically, we have here climate, chemicals, and pollution. How to have a happy marriage that lasts a long time and is very productive. And the people we have supporting us and stimulating your brain cells. Remember, it's your body that has to do the work. They can only encourage your brain to get going. They're going to give you their perspective. And their perspective, by the way, doesn't have to be right. It only has to challenge you. And if you can see that their perspective is wrong, then they have succeeded because they challenged you. To get us underway, I'd like to invite a few close and personal friends who tell us all that they know everything, and they're going to put us in the right mood. So firstly, Sheila Agarwal Khan, the Director, Industry and Economy Division, United Nations Environment Program, to get us underway.
Thank you for coming to this event today. I think it's on, right? Yeah, good. So thank you. And maybe as Donald said, decarbonization and detoxification. Well, everybody knows decarbonization because countries, companies, everyone's talking about how to get to net zero, how to have, a neutral carbon country. And so, but now suddenly we have detoxification. Well, last year in September in Bonn, we had the adoption of the Global Framework on Chemicals. And what did we decide there? We had discussions across governments, across different stakeholders, and the decisions taken adopted 28 targets, 5 objectives. And part of that was looking at industry sectors, textiles, buildings and construction, agriculture, electronics. And we said, well, okay, wait a minute, but these companies are all moving towards decarbonization. They all have their plans for going to net zero. But hang on a minute, there's a pollution footprint. So what does that mean? Well, on the one side, when you're manufacturing and you're producing your chemicals, you have an energy footprint, but you also have a chemical footprint in all of these places. And we've looked at these like 2 separate worlds. I know a financial mechanism, the Jeff, and Shiz will talk more about it, but I look at even how we operate, right? We talk of a climate crisis, a nature crisis, and a pollution crisis. But at the end of the day, it's one integrated crisis because wherever we're using energy, we could have a nature footprint and we could have a pollution footprint. And so you manufacture textiles, you're using energy to do so, you're then adding chemicals into it, dyes into it, you might have effluent, and then so you have a pollution footprint, and then it goes into products, it goes into consumers use it, and maybe it ends up in the waste stream when, even if you've used your textiles over and over again, at some point it becomes waste. And then that waste process is going to use energy. Whether you recycle it or you incinerate it, you're using more energy. And so your energy source suddenly becomes important. We look at, for example, buildings and construction. We've seen the buildings breakthrough at the last COP, and a lot of countries committed to their commitments, towards changing the industry across the entire very complex value chain. But chemicals is not necessarily factored into the products. And we've heard over this week some very interesting spaces where companies are looking. We heard yesterday, in fact, at the business and industry major groups event, we heard about companies, real estate developers who are looking to look at the pollution footprint of products and in general the sustainability of products and how to create markets so that real estate developers are able to tap into these different types of products. So suddenly we see even across industry some of these pieces coming together. So at the end of the day, yes, we can treat all of these separately, and for governments, it's probably quite a nightmare because you have policies that are not talking to each other, or you can look at it in a much more integrated manner. As some call it, it's more policy coherence, where you're looking at how do you have your energy footprint and your pollution footprint come looked at in tandem. Because whatever you do, whatever finances and budget you put to it, you actually put less to it if you're looking at it together. Let's look at agriculture. You know, we have a movement that has gone to net zero deforestation in some commodities, soy, palm oil. So you have less deforestation, so you have less of a, let's say, a climate mitigation challenge there. And then you have, on top of it, a pollution footprint, because when you have these crops, if you're using a lot of agriculture and pesticide, fertilizer and pesticides, you may have eutrophication, you may be causing, you know, all kinds of other chemical and health impacts, depending on the quantities you're using and how judiciously you use it. So this discussion here, and you'll hear from all the panel members, is to look at the different perspectives and how do we do this in a much more cost-effective manner, where rather than look at things in silos, we see what are the financing capabilities of looking at things in a much more integrated manner, so that whichever sector you look at, buildings, agriculture, electronics, plastics for that matter. And, you know, in April, we will be in Ottawa for the next round of negotiations on plastics. And in fact, some of you have looked at the Grid Arundel publication on the climate impact of plastics, where they trace the greenhouse gas impact of plastics, not even counting how climate change can mobilize effluents, because if you have higher temperatures, effluents can actually move faster through aqueous environment. And so you have a greenhouse gas impact on the one hand, and then you have mobility of effluents coming through. So the challenge to all of you, as you sit through this panel and engage with the panel members, is to think through how can we have more cost-effective solutions? How can we address many of these footprints together? And how do we have more policy coherence across them? Thank you very much.
Thank you. You may have noticed that she used a lot of complicated words like agriculture, buildings, fashion. In other words, it's everyday everything. And looking at what is behind your everyday everything. Thank you very much for the opening. And by the way, I noticed that her eyes were always looking forward. Yeah, it's a sign of somebody who knows the subject inside and out. And I'm not going to tell you anything about these people sitting on the stage. Imagine you're in a comedy club. Stare them down and tell them, make me laugh. So when they come to do their presentations, you're telling them, show me, show me. And I am assured that they will definitely show you. The next speaker, and it's I think the running right now, the Executive Secretary for the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, Rolf Payet. And by the way, Rolf, I trust you will be briefer than you were at our event at COP in Dubai.
Thank you very much. And then I cannot promise this because Don and I go a long way. In fact, before we became UN civil servants, we were country civil servants and negotiators. And then Don became the executive secretary of Rotterdam Convention at the time, and then decided to leave us and go into climate change. But nevertheless, I was also a climate negotiator, and my last climate change meeting was actually Copenhagen. And that was I would say the highlight of my career, because it really forced me to rethink what I want to achieve as a person, professionally and everything. And I ended up, as soon as the three conventions came together in 2012, in 2014, I joined the BRS Secretariat, and I've been working in this chemicals and waste space since then. And I've been so fulfilled, because the member states I work with have been amazing and really moving forward. Every country has their challenges, but we've really been moving forward. And of course, not also working with member states, but working with NGOs, civil society, and exploring the different dimensions, human rights, gender, and all this in the way it contributes to climate change. And then Don turned up. We've had exchanges briefly before. And then Don turned up at my COPs. I said, Don, what are you doing at my COPs? You are in climate change. He says, Rolf, it's time now for us to start looking at how we can work together, decarbonizing and, detoxifying. So we started to now unpack the relationship between those two big movements, climate change and chemicals and waste. And we found so much. And then I ended up in COP28, where he dragged me into some of the events. And from that time, I had separated myself from the climate change negotiations. Suddenly, my eyes lit up, and I suddenly started picking areas. And in fact, we had a meeting 2 weeks ago where we decided, I say, look, Don, we've done it. We've been in each other's COPs. Now let's move forward in more substantive way. And this is one of the first events, in fact, that we are doing together. So I'm really grateful for Don being here and moderating this event. I mean, where would you find him moderating a chemicals and waste event? Probably far unlikely. So I'm going to stop talking, but I think I just wanted to put the context of how far we've gone in our cooperation with UNFCCC. And of course, this evening, I'm speaking also on behalf of my colleague, Executive Secretary, Mrs. Monica Stankiewicz, who is the Executive Secretary of the Minamata Convention. Now, we think climate change and pollution as being related, but sometimes we don't sit down and think how they are related. So I can promise to explain to you all the details this evening, and I hope our distinguished panelists will be able to unpack some of these elements. But I assure you, it's a very deep mine or deep dive, and it will take us more events for us to really tackle the intersection between climate change and chemicals and waste. But I will just add another D word here, decoupling. Okay, so probably our next side event will be decarbonizing, detoxify, and decoupling economy from climate change and chemicals and waste. Now, just to present to you three important climate-related statistics. Solid waste is the third largest source of human-driven climate emissions. Solid waste, third. So right on the map. Secondly, releases of greenhouse gases and hazardous chemicals occur at each and every stage of production, whether it's manufacturing, transportation, and everything. This chemical sector is about 5% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and also the single biggest industrial user of fossil fuel, with almost 50% being used as feedstock. Thirdly, mercury and other chemicals emissions resulting from fossil fuels. Coal combustion in itself is the second largest source of mercury emission, and mercury catalyst used in vinyl chloride monomer production, plastic in which coal is also a feedstock. So we have three. There's more. We'll have another event where we can unpack this a bit further. But how do they react? So the first point is that they can mutually enforce the impact each They can exacerbate climate change and then also exacerbate the impact on health. So if we put efforts in both, we can also see reductions in climate change pressure and at the same time also reductions in pollution. So climate change accelerates the release of pollutants. So more heat, more mobilization of chemicals into the environment. They've been sitting there. I mean, the key one is methane, been stuck in permafrost. That's an obvious one. Okay, it's not man-made. But can you think of other chemicals that are sitting there and with the changes that's happening with our climate is being mobilized faster and is being released into the environment? And of course, the reactions that happen in a landfill is another area where we can look at, where increased temperatures or changes in the climate can influence the degradation and of course emissions from landfills. Secondly, pollution. Wildlife is already under stress from climate change. And then we add pollution to that. So it puts enormous stress on the resilience of ecosystems, not only on humans, but the resilience on ecosystems. So both of them can act together to make our ecosystems more vulnerable, more weaker, and as a result, less able to deal with, for example, adaptation or even mitigation in some cases. And when we look at oceans, pollution in the oceans also creates the kind of interference with ecosystem balance, which, as you know, ecosystem balance is restoring ecosystem balance is a key element in addressing climate change. So how can we work together? And I hope this August panel this afternoon will be able to unpack this for us further. I won't go into more details, and I just wanted to say that the BRS conventions, as well as the Minamata conventions, will continue this journey together with you, Don, and of course, with UNFCCC, for us to continue working in a way to develop a clear understanding of the relationship between those two, and also as we devise our projects, our financing, ensuring that the financing we are putting in place is also not only focused on decarbonization, but also at the same time is enhancing detoxification. So I will stop here. Thank you very much, Noah.
Thank you very much, Rolf. By the way, to give you a heads up, we are putting together the advisory package of support for developing countries and then determined contributions, NDCs, and we will be approaching your secretariat to assist with bringing chemicals and waste into that package and also delivering part of that training exercise, just as a heads up. Moving along, we couldn't leave money out of the equation. I know people like to say it's financial resources or means of implementation, but in reality, to me, it's just money. So to let us know how we make all of this function, Ms. Chizuru Aoki, the lead environment scientist of the BRS Secretariat, on behalf of Mr. Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, and she will explain who he is. Welcome.
Thank you, Don, and good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you for the introduction. I am not sure if Carlos Manuel needs an introduction, but let me convey his apologies. You know, he went to the CMS COP in Uzbekistan, all excited about the nature, the nexus, and everything else, and he came back and unfortunately he has fallen sick. So with apologies, he really wanted to be at the UNEA, but he just couldn't make it. So you get me instead. Okay, let me first applaud the BRS Secretariat, Rolf, as well as the UNEP, Sheila, for coming together with CCC and the CBD colleagues to organize this event at UNEA. You know, as someone who's responsible for all issues related to MEAs, this UNEA has been very exciting because it really has tackled the issue of MEAs and its role to address the triple planetary crisis and synergy. And having that discussion front and center of this global stage is very, very exciting to us. And we really appreciate the effort being made by the UNEP colleagues as well as other countries. So yesterday, there was the opening of the MEA Day. And in that session, the opening session, the UNEP Executive Director, Inger Anderson, made a really brilliant analogy. And she compared the MEAs to individual threads, right, of a tapestry that really is illustrating the world of stable climate, healthy nature, thriving lands, as well as pollution-free planet. And she challenged all of us, MEAs, as well as all the partners around the table, to weave this tapestry, and I quote, closer together, bring the big picture into a focus and make it reality. So this discussion we're having today here is literally a very concrete measure of how we can make that happen in two words I can't really say very well, is detoxification and decarbonization. And adding decoupling, it only makes it more difficult for people like us to say. But anyway, we're very much looking forward to having this conversation on how to make that reality. So this call for synergy, as well as action among the MEAs, is really something that resonates with the GEF and our increasing strategic emphasis on integration. Our key message here today is quite simple. We consider the GEF to be a financial integrator for the MEAs and translating that into the global environment. So our message here today is we need to invest in climate, chemicals and pollution and waste, and nature. We need to do that together to make a systemic and lasting impact. It's pretty simple. So the GEF, as of now, is actually growing. At this juncture, we're a family of 6 trust funds, and we have a very unique responsibility as a financial mechanism for 6 MEAs. Rove's Convention, one of them, Stockholm Convention, we serve, along with CBD, UNCCC, Minamata Convention, as well as the newest addition to the family, which is the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction. We also serve the Desertification Convention. So you can see the GEF is growing as well as also evolving. Over the last 30 years, we have invested approximately $24 billion in over 5,000 projects and programs. And they have been pulled together to support convention objectives. And increasingly, we're moving towards addressing the convention goals and objectives in an integrated manner. And those are being implemented by 18 GEF agencies, including UNEP. And UNEP has been one of the 3 regional agencies with a very strong partnership. And I'm very happy that this is being front and center in this particular context here. And we just had 2 years ago, a very successful replenishment. It is $5.3 billion for the GEF Trust Fund. And we also had the establishment of the new trust fund for the CBD to go with the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and its agreement. So we have established the new Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, the GBFF. And this is really allowing the GEF to do even more in the critical climate, pollution, and nature space together. So there is a positive momentum that's building. And we're very happy to be able to do our part on this. But we also recognize that I'm running out. 2023 was one of the hottest years. Biodiversity is really suffering, and pollution chokes our planet. We have less than 6 years to go before 2030. That's a critical deadline for many of the MEA goals and targets, not to mention the Kunming Montreal GBF. It's until 2030. We have less than 6 years to go. Also to mention the Sustainable Development Goals. So as the GEF grows more with MEAs and funds, the question we have been asking ourselves is how can the GEF act as a financial integrator and accelerator to help the global partnership embrace more of a united front? And how can we harness the power of integration? And because we're the financial mechanism, our answer also ties to money, as Don said. How do we articulate how countries and partners can enable integration? By making attractive programming opportunities that would cut across the convention goals, and to provide financial incentives for countries to do so. So this is our contribution to strengthening the so-called tapestry of the global action with MEAs. So this support integration as well as incentivizing integration has been growing since DEF 6, and that's DEF 6 started in 2014, right? Yeah, 14. So we have been pushing for the concept of integrated programming that would cut across the MEAs, and it's meant to break the walls between sectors, geographies, institutional levels, as well as recognizing the interconnectedness of our challenges. And let me give you some examples of what we're doing. In agriculture, we're supporting integrated programs that are marrying sustainable land management with climate smart practices, boosting food security, slashing emissions, and safeguarding ecosystems with also chemicals waste considerations. In energy, we're weaving together access to clean energy, efficiency measures, and safe disposal of hazardous chemicals used for the green economy, such as batteries, electric cars, while also pursuing increased resilience of electric grids, accelerating the shift towards clean and reliable energy securities in many of the countries that are very much vulnerable towards the negative impacts of climate shocks. We're supporting industry to embrace circular economy principles, minimizing waste, conserving resources, and driving new economic opportunities. And let us not forget cities, and this is where UNEP has come in very strongly. We're promoting their transformation into healthy and resilient spaces through green infrastructure, sustainable waste management, and in energy efficient and climate resilient buildings. So we're doing a lot, but integrated programming isn't just about tackling multiple challenges in a convenient platform. We also want to impact and make more impact towards accelerating progress towards more ambitious goals and targets. We want to incentivize aggressive decarbonization targets by also reducing emissions across sectors and fostering clean tech entrepreneurship, for example, building climate resilience. We can also detoxify by addressing diverse pollution sources, promoting cleaner production principles was something that UNEP has been promoting since I first joined UNEP over 30 years ago. And those kinds of measures can safeguard human health and restoring the environment. So we also have a lot of other examples, such as a net zero nature positive accelerator, supply chain integrated programs. I'm not going to go into details. One thing I wanted to say is that, and we will hear more from the panel today, integrated program isn't really a silver bullet. And we really must be careful to understand and articulate trade-offs, as well as
you're going to have to do it anyway. Think about how you can maximize doing it. It doesn't cost you any more money because you're doing it in the design phase. So an excellent suggestion on making sure that you recognize that these things are happening anyway. And now how can I make sure I get the most benefit out of it? And with that, I want to now recognize this fabulous panel that we have and to tell you that personally, I am really impressed. I have been with quite a number of groups, and I really have a high lot of respect for not only the information that they obviously have, but also the way in which they convey it. So the way in which we're going to proceed is we will engage them on different things, and they have different perspectives. Representing governments, NGOs, developed countries, developing countries. We're asking them to give their perspective on the areas that they represent. And firstly, we're going to discuss with Hugo Shally. So I just want to make sure that you have a mic in front of you. And he is the advisor for international environmental negotiations for the Directorate General for Environment, and more importantly, a part of the European Commission. So that sets the perspective from which he generates his input. And I've looked at some of the things that we wanted to get clarity on. But first of all, circular economy, net zero future. As a kind of general, quick 1-minute thing, could you give us your perspective on what you understand them to be? And then we can put the further comments on around that concept. Just what are we targeting? What do we mean by circular economy and net zero future?
Thank you. Thank you. It's working now, I guess. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I think it's for me it's a walk back in time, because Don and myself have been negotiating in Geneva at a time when I think there are people in this room who weren't even born yet. So, I am also in my personal, perhaps one that brings the two agendas together, because I'm both the lead negotiator for the European Union for the negotiation of the plastic agreement. I'm also EU lead negotiator for the Convention on Biological Diversity. So I bring several perspectives together. But I think it's probably not for that reason that my director had asked me to come here, because also I go back a couple of years in working on exactly the policies that Don has mentioned. And that is sort of how do we actually design policies and approaches that would help us exactly in the direction that has been mentioned, that are also in the title of this event. And I think it's the crucial point is really to look at the packages that we've put together over the last couple of years, which we resume under the title of Circular Economy Action Plans, because there are two of them. And the plethora of activities that are resumed under that. And I think the interesting thing, when we started to work on the impact assessment, we always do, impact assessments make sure that the officials working on the programs are already completely worn out by the time that is actually adopted. But it also provides us with a wealth of information. And in the context of that, we discovered that when we looked at the different activities that we foresaw in the context of these action plans, such as looking at improved waste management systems, clean material cycles, improved much use of recycled materials, reuse systems, refill systems, that we actually were already on course to generate very significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, and that this was a significant contribution not only to the resource efficiency part of our economy, but also to sort of making a contribution to mitigation efforts with regard to greenhouse gas emissions. Now, what is the sort of the fundamental approach that we are trying to take here, which is we are using a lot of resources, and we are actually producing and consuming a great number of products and materials. And in a linear cycle, we're actually throwing a lot of the value that are incorporated in those materials out, literally out the window as we go along. The windows are manifold. The windows are energy and material efficiency at the production stage. Another window is sort of wasteful consumption and distribution. Another window is loss and leakage into the environment. And of course, the last window is inefficient waste management and recovery systems. And all that is not only loss of material, but at every stage will also it's contributing to increased emissions of greenhouse gases. So in a way, looking at measures all across the life cycle of products, we're actually trying to see that the value that is incorporated in the materials in the products stays in the economic cycle as long as possible. And at the end of hopefully its first, second, third, fourth use life, it actually goes re-injected into the economy as such.
May I just for a moment, because you mentioned something that's juicy. And if you mention something juicy, you really got to expand on that. So you were doing A, B, and C, and you were actually getting benefits in X, Y, and Z. And secondly, when you were looking at the systems, you were not losing your fuel or your efficiency. You were actually losing money, right? Can you expand a little bit on those kinds of impacts? It sounds as though if I was an industry and I did those things, I would become a lot richer. So nobody has to encourage me to do that. You only have to explain it to me. So can you expand a little bit on how this expanded within the European Commission or the European Union?
Well, gladly so. I think it takes us in a slightly different direction, but I'm happy to talk about that. I mean, part of the equation is, of course, also that when you look at natural resources and raw materials, Europe is a net importer and actually relies a lot on those resources coming from the outside. And that's a cost factor. It's a competitiveness factor. And I think it already over the years, the changes that we're introducing have been a catalyst for innovation, because what does it do to industry? On the one hand, they actually say, okay, we cannot compete on cheap raw materials. We cannot compete on lower labor cost. We can only compete on being better at using what we have and actually trying to create our own secondary raw materials. So it is, as we discovered throughout that journey, it is actually a win-win situation. And I think it's money coming in, and it is certainly also an innovation journey. It's a technology journey. It's a journey to create new business models. And the whole system that we're trying to put in place is designed to help with that. And I think it's also interestingly so that it has benefits on the climate side. It has benefit on the chemical and waste side. And of course, it should also have benefits on the impacts that our economic and social activities have on ecosystems and biodiversity.
I have to ask just one more here. The European Union has been very successful at this. The amount of efficiency, the gains, the success of the companies and so on. Can you point to one or two of the things that allowed you to nudge the whole process to go in that direction? And then I guess once it was going, it just kept going and going and going. But for those who have not really pushed there yet, what were some of those key things upstream that allowed you to get it going towards the success?
I think there would be many things, but I'd like to dwell on one particular. And as we were in the formative phase, we of course always undertake extensive stakeholder consultation with civil society, but with industry and others. And what came out very clearly in the discussion with industry and business is something very surprising. Normally, what business and industry hates is laws and regulations. And to our considerable surprise, the answer was, for us to move forward, you actually need to take certain issues out of the competitive space. They need to become mandatory for everybody, because there are parts of business that derive economic benefit from a competitive advantage based on unsustainable or sometimes even unlawful behavior. So we need to take those out, and then a certain type of behavior becomes the norm. And that enables innovation, because we have a good number of businesses who want to move forward. And that's a driver for innovation. And I think that's something that was really key. And if you allow, I would make a sort of a connection to the international global world, because I see Rolf sitting there, and I think with the BRS Convention, they are trying to do exactly the same thing. And with the Minamata Convention, exactly the same thing. Montreal Protocol, the same thing. So I think it's trying to create a similar thing, because among member states and parties of conventions, some of the same things are going on. And since most of the value chains that they are dealing with are global in nature, you actually have to make sure that we have this regulatory level playing field internationally by trying to say to companies, we don't want that any of you are better or worse off because of certain behavior. We want all of you to do the same thing, which should be good for innovation and progress, but it should also go good for the planet.
Thank you very much, Oops. And I apologize if I interrupted you a little bit too much there, but believe me, the information was very valuable. And now we have to pass the microphone on to Ms. Beatrice Saiza. She's the Director General of Biodiversity and Climate in the Ministry of Environment in Rwanda. So we're now moving to a country perspective. And by the way, I'm rather embarrassed for this gender imbalance on this panel. And so I expect you to outshine everybody here to try and make up for that. And in the case of Rwanda, what we are looking for is, firstly, examples of the efforts that you've been taking, especially linking pollution, chemicals, environment, and maybe how that translates to national goals, health, education, income. So your experience, first of all, on bringing these things together.
Thank you, Don. I think I wish it was an exam. I've really studied hard to beat all the people here for Johnny Bones. But this is not, I'm just sharing what Rwanda is doing. When it comes about chemicals, pollution, and the climate, I think most of the time we look at it at the end. We look at it like upstream, downstream. Yet all the problems starts upstream. So for one case, I think policies have been coherent, and that has been a help for us. Policy-wise, strategy-wise, and mostly planning also has been very key for us to tackle the climate change, but also the pollution at the same time. So I would mention, like, we have this law, which most of you know, plastic use. This is one of the regulatory framework that has shown us that it's possible to work to tackle pollution, but at the same time to cut the emissions that we as a country are having. And but we also have this strategy, the national cooling strategy. And the cooling strategy is also strategies that help us to put in place the phase out of overheating substances and the HFCs, and eventually cutting emissions. So this is also one of the key examples that we are seeing that the policy which can help tackle at the same time emissions, but also pollution, also chemical as well. So talent contribution as well, with the aim of cutting 38% of the emissions equivalent of 4.6 CO2 ton equivalent. And this is coupled with many other activities, both ranging from the waste management, the landfill management, which is waste in nature, but also in the chemicals that we are using in different places, hazardous wastes that we are using in the hospitals and all other places. So I think those are the policies that are helping us to cut the emission and to go to the 38% as we are targeting. We also have the air quality strategy, which is also helping to cut the air pollution, which also help us to monitor our air pollution on a regular basis. And lastly, set the center on cleaner production, which is really a center that has helped. They go to find out different industries, and they give the advisory services to the industries on how they can move to the cleaner production and the whole value chain. And since the center has been established, we have seen the shift into the industries, and most of them really have acknowledged that the services of the center has helped them to not only cut their emissions or not only going cleaner as we wish at the environment side, but they have also benefits economically because they have cut some costs that would go into the, let's say, electricity, or some costs into the wastewater management or the water use. So it's really something which we are seeing, and those are the experience that we are working on to see how we can set policies to synergize and to coordinate all the sectors, especially when it comes about climate, pollution, and all the conventions.
I can't help but notice that you're actually doing what Hugo Shelley described the European Commission did. You set out some rules that everybody played by, and you applied those. And the end result was they made more money. They can employ more people. The atmosphere is cleaner and the water is cleaner. So the process starts and then it steamrolls. It's really excellent to hear from a country perspective that theory can be turned into practice. One of the things that we do in discussing with developing countries is to put in place systems that gather information, monitor and track what you consider to be important in your country, whether it's your industry, your healthcare, your school, fishing, agriculture, whatever it is, that you track it. It generates information for you. Now, many countries are members of many different conventions, and you have to report here and report there and report everywhere. And we are trying to see if countries see a benefit in bringing them all together, because you're generating the information, and then use the same information to fill out the reports. So do you see any future benefits in those lines for especially developing countries who are just starting to reap the success of these efforts?
Sure. I think bringing together all the focal points, first of all, it's easier, and it's really something which helps countries. And for us, Rwanda, I think this has helped us a lot to move forward, especially when we have the Basel Rotterdam Convention focal points, all of them under the same roof, under the same institution. When it helped in the coordination of the activities. And by the way, the CCC focal point is also under the same institution. So you could imagine how the coordination is easier for us, because whenever we're reporting on a given substance, we have stakeholder consultation, but at the same time, we have those people under the same roof. So it is very simple and easier for us to report. But also resource optimization. If we have, I remember we also had a project on POPs, and we could go to the field to see how we're going to phase out the use of POPs in different, we could go to the field with myself. By the time I was the Nagoya Protocol, which CBD includes, and we could go with Rotterdam, we could go with the UNFCCC, and all of us notify all the problems at the same time and go back to report and see how we can synergize, which means the resources are also optimized. But on the other hand, coherent planning. That was also one thing which helped us a lot to have all the focal points sitting under the same institution. So for the rest of the example, I think mitigation measures are also something that is done coherently, is done with all the pre-conventions together. So as Rwanda, and with the Rwanda Environment Management Authority, which is under the Ministry of Environment, as a regulatory agency, it has been easier for them to go and regulate. Whether you are regulating the transboundary movement of wastes, it's easier to go there when you are regulating, but you also notice that not only they are taking wastes from one country to another, but there is also hazardous wastes that are there. So those measures that we've been taking, and it's really very productive to the countries. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate that. And by the way, I will remember this when we are selecting people for the next COP. So be careful how successful you become. Thank you. To pass the mic now to Marcos Orellana. I should be able to say that. My wife is Cuban and speaks Spanish. The UN Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights. And here we are talking about bringing lots of things together and gaining on the left, on the right, and to get some perspective of what are these trade-offs that we might be going for, positive, negative? What do we have to take on board? If you could give us some idea of what we need to pay attention to when we're trying to take these initiatives.
Thank you, Dawn, and thanks to the organizers for their kind invitation. Dawn, on your UN jargon, I actually think that the words of the title are fantastic. Decarbonization and detoxification. They are full of meaning and they resonate with what Ms. Aoki said before me, interconnectedness. No, I do not work for the UN. I'm a UN Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights. It's an independent position of the Human Rights Council. It's a special procedure of monitoring
an assessment. It's the most update assessment on the first edition in 2015, and realized that we are not moving at all. It's not even at like a one step after another. We are not moving at all. So we really need an innovative approach there. We really need to leave the business as usual approach, the linear system, and take the next step into a circular waste management system. And for that, we bring some case studies, we bring some successful stories. And one of them is the case of like a zero waste city in China that really succeeded to implement this concept. And this one is very important because we have a resolution, a recent resolution approved by the UN General Assembly in 2022 about zero waste, really installing the UN's Zero Waste Advisory Board. I'm proud to be one of its members. And we have this advisory board collecting best practices to really show how we can move forward. Another, I would say, innovative example is using, for example, the remainings from some industries as raw materials to other industries that like we call it like the industrial symbiosis that must be maximized in many places. We were talking about, for example, agriculture now, and there is this Brazilian case of the beef tallows that it's 100% used there by the other, like the cleaning industry, so no remains from the beef industry. So there are a lot of cases that we really need to put forward, but I would say the main message to think about decarbonizing, detoxifying, and decoupling is that we need to change the paradigm. We really need another type of approach, and we need to bring everybody's to the table to ensure that we follow the same approach.
Let me get your input on as an example that you can maybe elaborate on. Used cars, no, wrong word. Derelict car, end-of-life cars, recycling of them. Under the existing regime, that's what $200-300 a car or something like that. Under the proposed New World, with the battery alone, that probably jumps up to several $1,000s per car. So instead of letting those batteries have a negative impact, your suggestion, I think I heard, was finding a way of having that be the start material for a new industry. That then means maybe countries aren't exporting those things. They are working on those within their own. Could you elaborate on that a little bit and then maybe move into looking at what kinds of changes maybe to business models or concepts before they even get off the table that might enhance this innovative approach?
Yeah, sure. Related to the user cars, and like we have this kind of situation with many other equipment, used equipment, like medical equipments, that we really need a different model, a different production model, and not like a production model in which everyone needs to buy a car. You can transform the business model to have product as a service. For example, if we use a car to commute from like our home to the office and park the car for the whole day at the office, we really don't need to have our own car. You can, for example, have this product as a service and you use the car to commute, and then someone else can use the same car during the day when we are at the office. So we can improve a lot this type of like to bring new approaches to the current business models in order to reduce, because the point is we need to reduce natural resources extraction. We need to reuse the waste as a resource for other industries, and we need really to generate less waste. I will just elaborate on that. For example, this report we launched yesterday. If we keep the same business as usual model, we will from 2.1 billion tons of municipal waste being generated in 2020 to 3.8 billion tons in 2050. It's a 65% increase within one generation. So if we keep this consumerism approach that we really need to buy, we really need to have, and then to discard, we create a lot of impacts and a lot of costs. And in terms of like what are the next steps in terms of how have it on board, I would say we really need to use all the intelligence, all the knowledge we have now to engage this cross-cutting and transversal topic. For example, to bring to the same page and enable the current frameworks to be enforced elsewhere.
Thank you. They have just told me that we're going to get kicked out of here. And they shouldn't have started me 25 minutes late, and then we wouldn't be running low. But I cannot let Beyond Bila's message go. The International Pollutants Elimination Network. And the reason I kept you at the end was because you heard all these people say all these wonderful things. But those words don't mean anything unless they live up to them. So what kinds of things or actions that your group or network might be able to do to make sure they do what they say?
All right, great. And I did speak at the end speaker at a long list of wonderful panelists that I had. It is, IPEN, as a global network of over 600 organizations in 127 countries, these are organizations that do the work because they're protecting constituencies. And the mission is really to protect the planet, protect human health and the environment and the future. Intergenerational equity is very important to the next generation, about these opportunities between decarbonization, or say commitments for climate and commitments for chemicals and commitments for sustainable development. It's all about what the Jeff tagline was, or people, for healthy planet for healthy people. And so the opportunity we see right now is plastics. I've been working in chemicals for over 20 years. And the last few years has been remarkable because people ask the question, what do we do about plastic pollution? You first have to say, what is plastic? And plastic is carbon and chemicals. You cannot have it without carbon and chemicals. Most of the carbon is fossil fuel. Most of the sourcing of that of the carbon is fossil fuel. Most of it. And if you look at the COP28 outcome, the big outcome was transitioning away fossil fuels, away from energy systems towards petrochemical, towards plastic. So there's an opportunity now to look at how do we get controls on chemicals and the growth of plastic production, which is set to double, if not triple, in the next couple of decades. So the opportunity ahead of us right now is the plastic treaty, and our role as NGOs is to widen the lens, that if you want to talk about circularity and you want to talk about recycling, how do we do that not recycle toxic chemicals back onto the market? And someone told me, glass is not showing up in the blood. Most recent studies are showing microplastics in the placenta. What materials are we using? So our job as civil society is to challenge a narrative about recycling. We're done. We worked together in 2009 to add flame retardants to the Stockholm Convention. And unfortunately, the European Union said to us, we have to get recycling exemption because we don't know what to do with all the flame retardants in e-waste. And you're NGOs, so recycling is good. And so we don't know what to do, so we have to get a recycling exemption. And we said, don't do that. You're going to kill the brand of recycling, but they had to do that because they didn't know how to change it. So our job as civil society is to help change the narrative back to what's really going on, what are the facts, and how do we get those facts to decision makers so we can make public policies for public health. And I hope that was fast enough for you, Donna.
Thank you very much. So, except for the 2009 reference. So to close us out, Maya Birchie, the president of the 12th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Stockholm Convention, yay! And the executive director, Chemicals Management Division and Environment Climate at Canada. And they're kicking us out of here and they're holding me responsible.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. Okay, so, sorry, I have to go back up here. So we first, so thank you, everyone. My name is Maya Birchie. I'm the new president of Stockholm Convention. So I'm just going to summarize what we heard. We started with a plea. Sorry if I garble any names. I don't know all of your names. We heard a plea from Ms. Agrawal-Khan that energy and chemical policies have to talk to each other. We need policy coherence and we need more cost-effective solutions. We heard from Ralph that connecting the dots between climate change and pollution is still a deep dive for many of us, and he challenged all of us to go diving. In fact, so did Ms. Aoki. She also encouraged us to go diving. And we heard from the GEF that they are very willing to help us go diving. In other words, welcoming these interconnections and integrated projects, including the CBD biodiversity goals. They want to incentivize integration and they are very willing to help us. We heard regulations and initiatives that are currently being developed within the EU to promote circular economy approaches and sustainable products at the design stage that are innovative and pave new ways to decarbonize supply chains. We heard that impact assessment provides a wealth of information for us when we look at the different activities like improved waste management system, clean materials, reuse and refill systems. We are already on course to generate significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions while also contributing to resource economies. And we heard it can save us money. We can make a win-win situation out of this. The innovation and technology journey can save us money. And then we heard the impressive work done in Rwanda at the national level to support a path towards green growth. We heard stories, fantastic examples about the Center on Clean Production that gives advisory services on how the whole value chain can be cleaner. And they have seen a shift. The center has really helped them cut their emissions and also benefited them economically. So we heard a real world example of a win-win situation. And that is so heartening to hear of these examples. Mr. Ornella challenged our thinking on trade-offs, suggesting that these he challenged the thinking that these are incompatible, and he gave the Rwanda an example. He also acknowledged that there are tensions, some of the decarbonization of the energy matrix and electrification of transport do produce toxics. He gave us the example of, extending life of plastics. It uses endocrine disruptors, plasticizers. So we need more oversight over the downsides. And so we need to take a life cycle approach, right? So we look at all of these solutions in an integrated manner. And we also heard that human rights is of crucial importance. Mr. Philo urged us to innovate in concept and change our paradigm, to move from the RRR, reuse, reduce, recycle, to the triple Ds, decarbonize, detoxifies, and decouple. He also gave us some nice successful stories, zero waste city in China, using industry, the remains in agriculture like beef tallow, to the cleaning industry. So there's no waste in that agricultural sector. He asked us, does everyone need a car? The product can be a service. Do you need a car? You get to the car, go to work, and give it to someone else to use. Mr. Beeler reminded us that plastic is carbon and chemicals. Most carbon is fossil fuels. We have to control plastics and toxics. The plastic treaty, we have to widen the lens, recycle, but don't recycle toxics. A civil society, we need to make public policies to protect public health. And so in closing, I will just say, we are all challenged to go diving. Let's go diving. Thank you.